Coming up, Vinsanity goes to the rafters at the Barclays Center. The Nets lose to the Heat. And my goodness, are those Tankathon-ons looking better and better for Brooklyn? We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms and let you know that Super Bowl 59 is here. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app today or head to FanDuel.com to get started, Doug. And where we get started, it's not so much about the 106-97 loss to the Miami Heat, but more about one of the rarities for the Brooklyn Nets / New Jersey Nets organization, sending a number up to the rafters. Vince Carter gets it retired, number 15. It was a heck of a weekend, heck of a night at Barclays Center when we're talking about things well beyond the current season and the current game.
Yeah, like nice to book a W, organizationally, even though he was part of the New Jersey Nets and not the Brooklyn Nets. And for a team that doesn't have extensive sort of feel-good history or sort of guys that are necessarily always associated with the Brooklyn Nets name, or excuse me, the Nets name just in general. It's always, I know there was some not controversy, talk about does this meet the criteria of jersey retirement? Yeah, when you're the Nets organization, it does. When this is the organization and these are the guys who played there and he's been there, as part of some memorable moments and he's a huge name, I think it's just totally fine. So overall, it was a nice night. He gave a really nice speech. Dr. J gave a nice introduction to him too. It was I said nice a bunch. It was just a welcome sort of revisiting of the past, even though that past wasn't necessarily, chocked full of all these banner raising moments, but I don't know, highlight reels aplenty.
Yeah.
Vince is Vince. And so I think that overall it was a nice moment. And I totally get why an organization, especially like the Nets, they're not retiring KD, Kyrie, and Harden's numbers. So at some point, it's nice to just put something in the rafters. So I'm all for it.
Oh, 100%, man. And this does represent. So he's in that early 2000s kind of run, 04, 05 into 08, 09. And it's not a part of the first iteration when it's with Jason Kidd and you're going to the finals and you're getting beaten up by the Spurs, getting beat up by the Lakers. But for me, that's right in the time frame when I'm 19. I'm 19, 20 years old, going into my early 20s. And you come off of that run where it doesn't quite happen for the Brooklyn Nets, but ultimately Jason Kidd leaves. But going and getting Vince Carter is what kept the band together a little bit longer. And you mentioned the highlights. It was just exciting, fun basketball. They go to the playoffs a few years there. They don't really advance. They lose in the conference semifinals the last 2 seasons that they make the playoffs while Vince is there, lose in the first round in that first season that he comes in. But it's just one of those. And by the way, that season that they went and traded for him, it was one of those moves that the season did not start the way that the Brooklyn Nets were hoping for. And it was kind of is Jason Kidd going to be gone right now, right this second? So you go and make some decisions. It's ending in Toronto for VC, and you bring him in. So, like you said, on a high level about when is it the right time? Well, I think it's okay. And other organizations would feel differently, like maybe the Lakers, and then the Boston Celtics. But if you're the New Jersey / Brooklyn Nets, Vince Carter does represent a great era of Nets basketball. And that's what's worth celebrating about it. And he was still a superstar at that time. And it's funny how the Nets have made a lot of big swings. I actually thought about this when I was watching the ceremony over the weekend, that the Nets have been a team that has swung big. They've been doing this for 20 years through different GMs and different ownership groups. They swung big to go get Jason Kidd. That worked out for them. They won on a bit of a run. They swung big to go get Vince Carter. And then it was the missteps of going and Paul Pierce. Then you get Darren Williams and you get Joe Johnson, right? This has been an organization that historically keeps trying to swing for it. And it's funny how the recent swings have been a little bit less successful than fans would like. But you go back in the early 2000s and you are talking about versions where, they were able to go land guys and make it really exciting to root for a team at the time from Jersey. But we know all that carries over here, and you get to send it to the rafters on Saturday night to celebrate Vince Carter. I think it's great. I think every organization should want to do this if they feel like they have the pulse of how their fan base feels about a player.
Yeah, and making the conference semifinals, we've talked about this, is obviously the championship is the ultimate goal, but semifinals I think is a good obviously next marker, only because it's a little bit more accessible. You're on the cusp, right? It's by percentages, it's just 4 chances instead of 1, right? So it's one of these things where I'm actually kind of like have reformulated my ideas around success, because if you get that far, it's like you are at the doorstep, right? And over a 7-game series, things are going to go the way they're going to go. To make it twice during that stretch is successful. And so I don't know, maybe I'm doing a bad job of sort of like retoggling what my version of success looks like, but I have thought about this more in recent years and just been like, it's just so impossible to win the championship. And because only team gets to win one, we have to just sort of mark our ability to know if it was sort of close to the right idea a little sooner than the championship. Right. So maybe that's wrong. Maybe that's a beta way to think. I don't really know, but I do feel that championship or bust is correct in how the organization should go for creating their team. Like you should be creating your team that can make it to the championship, and teams that get to the conference semifinals are like, it's getting close to proving that the concept was correct, at least.
Yes.
Right? That's all I mean.
And to your point, I think it's, again, the goal is championships, but the way in which you go about celebrating your organizational successes, those can be compartmentalized from it's all about how do we make ourselves competitive? How do we try to win championships? It can also be that you go through really fun eras of basketball and you have a lot of winning basketball, even though it may not get there. So this may bleed over into other conversations as we work through the episode. I will just remind everybody that when you go in and look at all those right now in terms of all time, we know that Brooke Lopez, who was not a massive amounts of a lot of the losing in Brooklyn to LA after they helped get his shot correct so he could shoot from the outside. He's the all-time leader in points. Down third is Vince Carter, 8,834 points. Right behind him, a guy that fans kind of talk about. Maybe he should be in the rafters. Richard Jefferson, 8,507 points. And then it's Jason Kidd. And then it's Kerry Kittles, right? So especially putting Kittles in there as well, who came through that era. And it's actually 11th is Keith Van Horn, by the way, in case anyone's wondering. That to me, like, is a group of players that mean a lot or have a whole lot of significance for me at different tiers of what this organization was accomplishing or not. But then it's also pure fan vibes. When you're a young kid, when you're in your teens, you want your team to win, but let's just be clear. I loved watching Keith Van Horn play because he had high socks and he was a white dude and kind of goofy, but was getting some things done, right? Like, it didn't matter that Kendall Gill was not a part of the golden age of Nets basketball. Sometimes it is just who you grow up with as well. So I'm sure there's probably a collection of fans who are a little bit even younger than me and younger than you who would say, you know, I really got into it after the Nets had already lost in those finals again, you know, Western Conference teams. And Vince Carter represented like the hype of the possibility of that next version. I have one more little tidbit here as we turn our attention over to Tankathon odds, which are going really well for Brooklyn right now. One more note about Vince Carter as we continue the conversation coming out of the weekend. Send in number 15 to the Raptors right next to number 5, Jason Kidd. We'll do that here coming up in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you our friends over at FanDuel, Super Bowl 59, right around the corner. One game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. You're predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, betting on the coin toss. Hell yeah, baby. FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action, live betting all game long. Adjust those bets as the game unfolds. Feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. Live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what's happening on the field. App's super easy to navigate, obviously, as well. Plus, knowing you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake, baby. Yes. Download the free app. Download the app or head over to FanDuel.com to get started. Just bet $5, and if you win, you're going to score $200 in bonus bets. It's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 59.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, coming off the weekend, a loss for Brooklyn. We're going to get to Tankathon odds here. There's just a couple more things I do want to touch on real quick here. When Vince Carter comes over, he averages 27.5 points per game that first season he comes over. It's 20 games into the year. I think he had 20 games with Toronto. Averages over 24 the next year, 25 the year after that. All-stars in both of those seasons, and then finishes 21.3. But, man, a couple of things. One, he's playing, when he comes over to Brooklyn, he's playing almost 39 minutes, almost 37 minutes, 38 minutes, and 39 minutes. I mean, gone is the era of dudes that step on the court and go, I basically play almost every second, right? I mean, like, there still are guys that do that. The Knicks are in that kind of version of it now. But usually we talk about 34-ish kind of minutes is kind of the standard. You don't I typically see 38-minute stat lines for a lot of guys. And Vince Carter did that from 28 to when he's 32 years old. But more importantly, Doug, he went on to play another 11 seasons. It was, coming into maybe like the tail end of Vince Carter's prime. He just kept going and had multiple stints with familiar teams. I think the Hawks maybe is the last one that he finished with.
But he was on the Hawks. He was on the Hawks when the Nets started when the Nets signed Kyrie and KD.
1920. Yeah, 43 years old, played in 60 games, coming off the bench, still averaging almost 15 minutes a night, and giving you a solid 5 points per game.
That's what I mean. He was on. He just stopped playing yesterday. People kind of forget it and he can still dial it up. There was times where he got in there for Atlanta and actually was productive. He was basically a bench guy at that point. I think, honestly, not to make the whole thing about Carter here, that to me is the ultimate sign of professionalism. It's clear that he's well loved. He's a guy that people like. You don't get, frankly, you don't get announcing gigs if people don't like you. You don't get color commentary gigs unless you're super likable team player, because you just there's no point if you're just a jerk who no one wants to sit next to you.
We'll find somebody. Don't worry. There's ex-players we can bring in here. We don't need you.
And we just don't need to sit next to you for 82 games if you're a pain in the ass, right? And so it's always these the ability to collaborate is always what I find to be one of the best sort of just personality markers. Artists that are always doing stuff with other artists. It's that's probably a good sign. Not always, but it's a good starting point to know if you're a good person. Playing to your 43 or whatever he was when he retired. Was he 43? Yeah. Playing until he's 43 with these teams and just being willing to play off the bench 15 minutes a game, especially when you've had that career that he had, is just a sign that he's just everyone likes this guy. Good to have around, great in the locker room, great for the young guys. I don't know. So it's one of these things that maybe goes unsaid, but sometimes you can just look at, you can kind of just look at the basketball reference page and say, oh, did this guy play 20 seasons? And at age 43, he was just still on a team and the team was willing, because they don't have to sign you. There's tons of guys. I don't know. It's just it's such a resume, end of resume win for a guy who clearly people just like to have around. And then it comes through in his speech and everything like that, and how he talks about the game and the way people talk about him. So anyway, this isn't any breaking news, but I just think sometimes those are the things that aren't talked about. That's not, you're going to talk about the dunks and you're going to talk about the net scoring legends and you're going to talk about, all the accolades and everything like that. And then there's also just this guy that played 4 seasons ago and was just happy to do it. Yeah. And then to wait until the wheels came all the way off and still a team was willing to have him all around. And I think that's just a cool thing.
And by the way, he was 6th man of the year at 36 and 37 years old. He was 6th man of the year. Now 14th in the one season, but he was 6th in 6th man of the year when he was playing in Dallas at 37. And at 40 years old, he was in Memphis. He played with them for a few seasons, 73 games. He only started the back end of his career. We're going to move on, but I'm on Basketball Reference right now. He only started from age 36 till the end of his career. He started less than 30 games, but he played in hundreds of games in that span, played 81. And that last season there at 40 years old in Memphis, 73 games, 15 starts, playing over 24 minutes, and still knocking down, by the way, I want to make sure I got this right, 3-point percentage. So he's in Memphis at 40 years old playing in those games. Yeah, he's averaging 4 3-point attempts per game, hitting almost 38%, career 37% shooter from beyond the arc as well. It's just awesome. And it's awesome that
he played more than 500 games when he was no longer a starter in the league. More than I'm just doing the quick math on this. It was more than 500 games when he was not a starter.
And by the way, that's also a really good tip of the cap to a guy, as you say, well liked, but also that he understood. He understood that he was aging out of the starting role, aging out of superstar role. But it was I love playing basketball. So there's, egos prevent a lot of guys from doing that. A lot of guys retire at 34 because they're okay, if I'm done being the elite of the elite, I don't want to do it. But Vince Carter slowly shifted his role and was still a great contributor, probably a great locker room guy and all those other things. So just awesome. And if I come up with another random memory from when I was younger, I'll bring it up on a podcast, but I can't remember yesterday. So we move on to other things that happened over the weekend. The Nets did lose this game, just in case anyone was wondering, 106-97 to the Miami Heat. Tried to put a little bit of a run into it at the back end. Keon Johnson, I'll just briefly stop on this game and say, even though he missed the last 3-pointer he took, he did hit the 2 previous 3-pointers that kept the Nets kind of clawing back in at the back end of it. And Jordi Fernandez talked about it after this. and I think this is always going to be the theme in these post games. I know we're not getting the W's, to paraphrase, but I like everything that's happening. I like what everybody's doing, even if it's not the W's, and he keeps trying to hang his hat on that, which you're going to need to do as this season rolls along.
I just wish the shooting would get more efficient. It just doesn't seem like it's happening. That's the only thing. It's just that he just can't knock I mean, especially too, like he's never really been all that efficient, and it's always going to be harder in an offense like this unless you're Cam Johnson. Yeah. But like overall, I just hate
when you lead a team in shots. You kind of can't be 7-19 and
30% from three. You just can't be a small 2 combo guard and shoot 30% from three. I hate when it's just this reductive, but it sometimes is. You have to be able to be more efficient especially if you're going to be undersized and not be able to do like, be an offensive engine and stuff like that. So happy to have him around as just a guy who can at least take some shots and is willing to take shots, because they have very few guys on the team that can even do that at this point.
Yeah.
And I just wish this number would just sit more like 36%, but it just doesn't seem like he's got it in him. And I don't know. Again, like no real high level thoughts from this, except that this is just kind of this has been the sort of the Keon Johnson experience. He happens to play in a team where they have, 2 guards that are able to play right now. And he's one of them, and he's not a point guard, and he's not able to do some of these other things, but you got to play 48, and you need some guys who can dribble. You need some guys who can dribble here. And he just kind of fits that bill. And I'll always love the Nets taking shots on guys like this, Zaire Williams, Keon Johnson, but the expectation has to always be low, because there was a reason they didn't kind of work out their first or second stops, and now they're available for cheap, right? And then there's usually one glaring flaw in the game. Yeah, because you got Zaire Williams, the same thing. Like one glaring flaw, and the flaw is they just can't shoot efficiently. Killian Hayes too, like right, like this is the list. The list is usually you can do. You have the other stuff. You have the intangibles. You have the size, the length, the speed, the burst. Keon Johnson still have crazy hops. But if you just can't shoot efficiently, at some point the math just stops working.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it is funny, too, because every time they pick up these young guys, if you listen and follow the podcast, that, and I definitely come as close to like irrational excitement around a young guy that gets brought in, and then they flash every once in a while. But as you mentioned, typically, it does regress back to the mean. There's a reason why these guys are available to grab on a flyer in the offseason. There's a reason why they may bounce around, but whether that's the case or not for Keon Johnson going forward, you hope that he continues to pop a little bit and continues to get opportunities. Only other note, which we will carry over into this third segment when we talk about the Tankathon odds as well, is DAngelo Russell gives you 6 minutes, 6 of 13, 4 of 8 from deep, poured in 6 assists as well, 22 points in this game. He continues to look good. I mean, he continues to look really good, to the point where there is a conversation. I think we've batted this around a little bit, but we had some interactions with Koo from Locked On Pistons saying they might want a little backup point guard action, and whether or not they'll have to come get him. That plus the Brooklyn Nets, they're right where they want to be when it comes to Tankathon. Watch out. We're there. We're coming for number 3. We'll get into that here to close things out in just one moment. All right, a reminder as we tie a pretty little bow on today's Locked On Nets episode that you can do a couple of things. One, we have the newsletter going out that you can check out and get for all the teams, let alone for Locked On Nets. But then also on Tuesdays, before those nights games start, you can get the NBA East Squad and NBA West Squad shows, roundtable discussions led by Sean Woodley for the East from Locked On Raptors, and then Nick Angstedt from Locked On Mavericks. I'll take a little dramatic pause there just to throw some shade his way. Really good discussions. Different hosts come in, talk about some of the high-level narratives that are going on. Even if Doug or I aren't on, it's still a good way to tap into some of those discussions. Check those out wherever you get your podcast, and YouTube needs fulfilled. Now, we can touch on the D'Angelo Russell contract after we highlight the fact that the Brooklyn Nets are absolutely just dominating the Tankathon process. I mean, outside of Washington, who knows how to do it, 13 straight losses. But the Nets have now lost 6 in a row. They're 1-9 in their last 10. They have games in hand on Charlotte specifically, who sits there at 12-30. There's no way around it, man. This team is right in the thick of being there to get into the top 4 and maybe even top 3 when it's all said and done. I'm not surprised. But you and I talked about this a lot, where those wins at the beginning of the year, and that it would all probably work out in the end. Well, we're about 50-ish games in, and it's all starting to work out.
Last night was a nice tank night, too, because they had the Nets playing against the Heat, but you also get Hornets-Pelicans, where no way the Nets can lose that one, because both those teams, like kind of no matter what happens in that one, the Nets are going to come out with a quote unquote W, because they're kind of vying with both those teams. So that's all good. And then you get the Raptors smoking the Hawks, which you like to see, because that's going to be another team that they're going to try to vault here, right? Because like those are the three teams right ahead of them right now: Pelicans, Hornets, and Raptors. So I misstated this the other day too, and I feel bad because I was like, oh, we're not counting the losses, but I'm realizing if you're ahead in the loss column, I've realized this right after we recorded, that if you're ahead in the loss column like the Pelicans are, that's better. I kind of, again, reformulating your brain to like get to grasp it around the ideas around losing is really
that
hard.
Being good.
Exactly. Because I was like, oh yeah, they're ahead in the loss column. I'm like, oh, that's better. like that. Sorry, that's better.
I did this, by the way. I did this over looking at the Giants when the season was coming down to the end and strength of schedule. And I kept being like, oh, they're in the driver's seat here because their strength of schedule is better than these other teams. And it took me a whole week to be like, no, the teams that suck more against bad schedules are in a better position. So yeah, it's always a rewire around this stuff.
Yeah, because I was like, oh, like the Pelicans already have 34 losses. That's so good for the Nets. I'm like, well, wait. Right when we finished, I was like, oh shoot, that's so wrong. That's you like the Pelicans are a better situation because they already have banked more losses. So anyway, this is where your brain gets totally idiotically scrambled about having to just root for something, betting on unders and like betting on and doing stuff like this. It just doesn't. That's not how the brain wants to think a lot of times. You're trained, thankfully, still as humans. I think we're mostly trained to want to root for positive outcomes in almost every scenario. And so when you start rooting for negative outcomes, it doesn't click as fast. Anyway, long story short, last night was a good night for the tank because of the aforementioned games with the Raptors beating the Hawks. They moved to 13-32. You get the Hornets crushing the Pelicans. Although I still think the Hornets are going to be a tough one. Although overall, that's a better win because I think the Hornets are going to have a tougher time winning than the Pelicans long term. Like if Zion can stick around and just keep playing, because like the Hornets with Brandon Miller, I mean, that team's total trash. But overall, I think the night shook out as quickly as possible. And I will say, yesterday, I do my one spin of the Tankathon dial yesterday.
How'd it go? Ooh.
That's number one. Right. I closed. Yeah, I just closed the webpage. Right. I said, I'm not doing it again. That was the one for the day. It was Cooper Flag, Nets at the top. Take the W's where you can get them and move on with the rest of your life. And that's what I did.
Now, you remember the classic Press Your Luck game show from the 70s. We were all around and enjoying that. Let's go ahead right now on Tankathon. Adam pushes the simulation odds and, well, listen, it wasn't perfect, but fourth. So we still moved up the board. Ultimately, probably should have stuck with Doug's chances. That's why you never press your luck. Whammy, whammy, whammy all night long.
I just did it seventh. There was a guy, there's a famous story about the guy who figured that out, like way back in the day.
Yes. The dude crushed.
There was a guy that just watched like 10,000 hours of Press Your Luck and just figured out the algorithm and just absolutely just angle shot them for like the whole for the whole thing. And so I always love stories like that. Now we're really getting off the reservation, but that's okay. This is what happens. This is what happens when you're just a team that just, you're like, okay, well, we talked about D'Angelo Russell playing okay. Tosan can't hit a shot. I mean, what else is there?
Yeah, you're right. Like, and then what do you want to go to next year? But to your point, those three teams, Pelicans, Charlotte, and Toronto, are all 5-5 in their last 10 games. I think the Pelicans are the team that'll win their way out of the Nets' way in terms of getting towards the bottom. Even if it's Charlotte, I think Toronto is interesting to watch. They've won 3 in a row here. So I think that the fourth is very achievable. The third will be like the wait and see, right? And you look at the schedule, you find those head-to-head matchups, and you go, what is it going to take here? And by the way, if you think that every team involved near the top of the draft board isn't all having the same discussions in their organization when they go to those, that's why you have the tank off and you see which team can accurately mismanage their own roster to the worst of their ability. So we'll see how that plays out. The only other thing here that came out of this was D'Angelo Russell's been playing well, as I mentioned before, and we've seen that. And Koo from Locked On Pistons was talking about needing backup point guard help. And somewhere in there, we got tagged. There's a Pistons fan that really likes our show as well, and we appreciate his support. So he tags us in it. And when I said, yeah, man, listen, come get him. We're waiting. The deadline's looming. Koo said, we'll just wait for the buyout. I'll make this very clear for Koo, for anybody else that wants D'Angelo Russell. He's not getting bought out by the Brooklyn Nets. There's no reason. You're watching the action. They are losing games as he's playing incredibly well. They're not going to buy him out. D'Angelo Russell isn't going to take the buyout because he's going to collect every penny he can before he goes to market this offseason. If somebody wants him, they are going to have to come get him. I'm very curious about it because I also had the Kamenetsky bros from Locked On Lakers go. They're like, talk about chemistry or not. The Lakers need more ball handling right now. They jettisoned the guy that they actually need the skill set of. So I think he's desirable. I don't know who comes gets him, but it was funny with Detroit, a team that's doing that kind of winning. that feels like, hey, let's try to add a little piece here. A couple of those teams are fun to watch for here as the deadline comes up when it looks at D'Lo. And listen, a second-round pick, 2 second-round picks, whatever it may be, right? But the Nets may be able to squeeze a little bit of value out of them.
People have gotten a little screwed up about what buyouts look like in the NBA. I'm pretty confident about this now. They do not think about the buyout market correctly. It's like these are just not the guys who get bought out. Like guys like D'Lo, who are, I mean, what's he, 28? I mean, he's I screwed this up. How old is he? 28? Yeah, 28. Yep, nailed it. Like these are just not the candidates for this stuff. Like these are the guys who get bought out are we're on our last NBA legs here. And they know that it's been signaled to them that other contracts might not be coming. This is a chance to maybe ring chase. It's a chance to be like the vet on a good team, like to maybe get some bench minutes. These are the guys who get bought out. The guys who are just still are under 30 years old and have clearly good basketball in them do not get bought out. Like it's just not going to happen. Even guys like Simmons, who make a lot of money, who do not know if the next gig is coming around the corner, slightly different situation. They're not going to take a buyout because when you take a buyout, you take less money. Like you just don't take, you'd be insane. Your agent would be doing a bad job probably if they suggest you take a buyout unless they were positive. And I don't think they can even do it because I think he makes too much money for the new team coming in because it's like not like they're getting some huge savings. So like they don't get a savings coming in. So I just don't think that maybe they get a slight savings. I just don't think people are thinking about buyouts correctly. Almost always, frankly, because they don't look at it from the view of the player. Like almost always, the reason people get screwed up about buyouts because they're thinking about it only with the team mechanics. Like, oh, it makes so much sense. They should just buy him out. The team, it almost never makes sense for the player to do it. Strictly on, you just get less money. And what player is going to want to do that? And you signal that like you're not good enough to keep playing. So when you go to the next contract, because like D'Lo's is in a contract here, he's got to re-sign a contract. It's just like putting a mark on your resume. I just think that people need to really go back and just remember like sort of what happens with a buyout. Because this is one of the things people I think screw up the most consistently. We're just assuming something's going to happen. They're very rare, and they only happen to like a certain kind of guy. And these aren't the kind of guys that they happen with.
Yep. 100%. So we'll keep an eye on what happens maybe with D'Lo as we work our way towards it. And by the way, Nets will be taking on the Kings on Monday night here, obviously, but also we talked about chances. Well, guess what? On the 29th, they go to Charlotte and play them. They're going to play Charlotte again on February 10th. And oh, by the way, they're going to play the Wizards on February 5th and again on February 24th. And, they may not be catchable, but there you go, right? The 4 games against the teams that are ahead of you in the tank odds, like get out there. If you lose those games, let's just focus on Charlotte. You're in it. Like you are right in the mix with Charlotte, who has only played right now 42 games. The Brooklyn Nets have 46 games. So there are 4 games right now for Charlotte that they could win or lose relative to where they are. So even 1 or 2 wins, and then those 2 key matchups are going to be big for the Brooklyn Nets. That's the deal. Kings, maybe Cam Johnson won't be able to play. Don't think they're calling for him necessarily. That trade opportunity seems like it might be further away than it looked like maybe a month ago with them.
All right, we are going to get out of here. Recorded this one early, just get it in before a little NFL action going on Sunday. In the meantime, make sure you are subscribed to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube as well. Leave those comments. Look, we get into the Fan Take Fridays. We're going through those comments. We're commenting on stuff. We're using it for show stuff. So just get in there over on YouTube, hit subscribe, get us to 8,000.
They only invited some of the all-time great poets, and that is the chosen one.
Joe Martin over on Twitter talking about people that were invited to the Vince Carter ceremony, as Adam and I lamented that they did not. No one thought of the podcasters. They did not. Nope. They did not invite any of us. So they went with some other no names. Anyway, Joe had it exactly right when he had it exactly right. But frankly, Joe, big supporter of the show, bit of a shot fired across the bow. You know what I mean? I don't think totally appropriate. That's all right, because what we're gonna say is Joe Martin, the chosen one of the all-time great poets. We're back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball. Basketball.